Middle Line Road. Much of the action in Ballston in this war was centered on Middle Line Road, but other areas in town were also involved in revolutionary activities.
You probably heard of George Washington. You probably heard of the Battles of Saratoga. Paul Revere, the hero who warned the colonists that the British were coming. You might have even heard of Sybil Ludington. Sybil Ludington, who did the same thing Paul Revere did, except she did it in Connecticut. She did it for a longer period of time, and she was only 16 years old when she did it. These guys are heroes. They are heroes that we know about, we've studied about. They're part of our cultural literacy in this country. We respect them, we honor them for what they did for us. They did all they could to establish us as a country and rid ourselves of what they considered the tyranny of the British government. But there are heroes all over the 13 colonies, all over what was called America at that time. I bet you've never heard of most of them. Have you heard of people named White, Gordon, Leake, Scott? I bet you haven't, but they are all heroes of this revolution too. And they all came from the town of Ballston in Saratoga County in New York State. They are people we need to celebrate and honor, as well as the famous ones that we hear so much about all the time. So let's give the chance to some of the residents of Ballston to tell you their stories and tell you what they did in this fight to get rid of England as our mother country. I'm standing here at the Betty's house. Now, the Betty's house was built in the late 1700s, and it still stands today. Today it's on Route 50 in the Ballston Lake area. But it was the home back in the 1700s to the Betty's family. Mr. and Mrs. Betty's and their son Joe lived here at times. Now, this area of Ballston was basically a hotbed of loyalist sentiment at that time. Most of the people who were living here were supporting the British side, unlike other parts of town, which were very rebel-dominated. So the Betty's family and Dad Betty's was very definitely on the British side. Joe, however, was not on the British side. Joe was a rebel. He believed that we should rid ourselves of the British rule and establish our own country. I can only imagine the kind of arguments that must have gone on in this area, in this house, between Joe and his father at different times, until Joe finally got so fed up with listening to his father's ideas that he took off and went north. He went up to Canada. He joined the rebel forces. He wanted to fight for our independence. And in one of the battles he fought in, up in Canada, all the commanding generals were injured and incapacitated. Joe took over, he ran the battle, and did it remarkably well. Shortly thereafter, he left that area and went to the Lake Champlain area. He went and joined Benedict Arnold. Yes, the famous, infamous Benedict Arnold. And he fought with Benedict Arnold and fought valiantly. He believed, just like Benedict Arnold did, that he should be rewarded for his service to our new nation to be. And he believed that he should be advanced in rank. Just like Benedict Arnold, he did not get that advancement in rank. And so, just like Benedict Arnold did, Joe Betty's traded sides. He went to the other side. He joined the British. and decided that he would start delivering messages from the rebel side, which he had access to because he was doing all of this secretively. He would pass messages from the rebel side to the British side. Joe Betties became a spy. Joe Betties became a traitor. Joe Betties became, in most people's eyes, a villain. He traded these messages for quite some time until finally he got caught. He was taken to a jail in Albany. And while in that jail, his mother petitioned George Washington, General George Washington, to secure her son's release. George Washington listened. He knew that Joe had done a great job. And he agreed to Mrs. Betty's request. He released Joe basically with a slap on the wrist and said, "Joe, don't do it again." Well, Joe, as he was apt to do, didn't always listen to the people he should listen to. He started doing it all over again, delivering more and more and more spy messages until finally he gets captured again, this time in Jonesville, New York, not far from here, by a group of men who were in the woods and recognized Joe. Joe was taken once again to a jail in Albany to await his trial and his potential sentencing. So I'm going to leave the story at that point and come back to this in a little while and tell you what happened to Joe Betties.
So I'm here at Angus McDermott's house. Angus McDermott, being a Scotsman, offended an earl in Scotland, ended up here in Ballston, and his part in the invasion of 1780 involves his home, in which there were some loyalists up in Lake Desolation. In that group, you had loyalist soldiers as well as Mohawk Native Americans in search of rebels. And as they came through here, over 100 men, Native American as well as loyalist soldiers, they stopped here at Angus's house. They enter the home looking for any kind of patriotic activity. When they're in there, it is reported the next day that the floor does collapse in the McDermott home. The group does end up in the basement. And the reason for that, as time goes on, is that the Native Americans in particular were so enamored by Mrs. McDermott's spinning wheel that they all crowded into that living area, and the floor could not hold that weight.
The raid in Ballston happened in 1780 in the middle of the American Revolution. So, what exactly happened here? Melinda Gordon spoke of a sudden nighttime attack on their home. The raid had officially begun. The British troops and their Indian allies had attacked the area to rid it of Patriot fighters. General Gordon and a number of other local men were captured and taken hostage. Middle Line Road was home to a number of Patriot fighters, and it became a battleground of sorts. British Captain Monroe's troops were in need of food and supplies to continue their attack. So one by one, they began pillaging the houses on Middle Line Road. They took food, cattle, provisions, and when they were done, they burned many houses to the ground. Though the raid only lasted for a few hours, its effects were felt for years to come.
One of the heroes of the raid, Granny Leake.
Just imagine, it's October 17th, 1780. It's a cold, early autumn morning on Middle Line Road in the town of Ballston. You hear gunshots in the distance. Homes, barns, and fields are aflame. You hear loud voices saying, "We're under attack by Mohawk warriors and loyalists." Unfortunately, the next farm in line is Mr. Filer's. He quickly gathers his family together and leads them to safety in the woods. Unbeknownst to Mr. Filer, his mother-in-law, Granny Leake, has stayed behind hidden. She watches as her home is torched, and then the warriors slowly, silently leaving. She jumps up and single-handedly puts out the flames, saving her homestead. This brave woman and the love of her family has saved a legacy for all of us, and that is the house that still stands today.
One very lucky Ballston resident, George Scott, saved by coincidences.
We're standing in back of a very old house on Middle Line Road in the town of Ballston. Not very far from here, nearly 250 years ago, lived the George Scott family and their family dog. The raid on Ballston was taking place at that era, and early one morning, the Scott family was rudely awakened by the barking of their dog. George, knowing that the raid on Ballston was taking place, excuse the bugs here, was taking place, quickly grabbed his musket, opened up the front door, and he was greeted by British Captain Fraser. Now, Captain Fraser and George were acquaintances some time ago. Captain Fraser told George to immediately drop his weapon or he'd be quickly killed. Well, you know, in the face of the enemy, that's kind of a hard thing to ask somebody to do. However, before George could even put down his weapon, one of the Indians that was present with George, or present with Captain Fraser, threw his tomahawk and hit George in the head, knocking him to the ground. Well, at that time, another fellow who used to work for George, Mr. Springsteen, rushed up to assist George and held off the Indian from coming up and scalping him and finishing off the kill. And it's just very coincidence that the two people that came as his enemy were the ones that really saved George's life and that of his family.
Stephen White, a true hero in the town of Ballston.
Stephen White was taken captive and marched to Canada. During that march, the Indians who had taken him prisoner formed the infamous death ring around him, a sure sign of his imminent demise. However, while they had a tomahawk held directly over his head, with courage and presence of mind, he grabbed it from one of his captors. The other savages exclaimed "brave," and instead of ensuring his death, ensured his survival.
After White's harrowing escape, he helped to fortify the Patriot Fort at Cherry Valley, New York, and then assembled and drilled soldiers at the Ballston Fort. That fort was located at the present-day corner of Route 50 and Charlton Road.
The raid itself was over. The men who had been taken captive were forcibly marched north to Montreal or Quebec City. The journey itself was very hazardous. They had to ford deep waters and climb mountains to reach their destination. They were imprisoned in horrific and dangerous conditions. Many contracted scurvy from nutritional deficiencies. But after 2 years, stories of brave escapes began to emerge. Some men dug an escape tunnel over the course of 18 days after which they were able to flee their captors. General Gordon was released after 2 years and was returned to Boston. From there, he slowly made his way home. When he returned to the town of Ballston, he became an esteemed member of the community and even served as the town's first supervisor.
This is the home of Uriah Gregory, who was an early Ballston settler and a Revolutionary War veteran. In 1843, his granddaughter asked him right in this room to tell a story about what he did during the war. Using that information, as well as a pension record that he prepared in 1832, we have a lot of information about his various exploits. Uriah was born in 1754 in the southwestern part of Connecticut, where many of the Ballston settlers came from. He was born one of 10 children of Hannah and Reuben Gregory. By the year 1775, at the age of 21, Uriah was out of his home working on a farm. He had to make a decision, much like all the young men in Connecticut at that time, as to whether he would support the Loyalist cause or the Patriot cause. It's assumed that he was influenced by those around him to joining the Patriot militia. He'd signed on for 3 months for a militia regiment from Connecticut to go to New York City to build the defenses of the city in anticipation of the coming British invasion. When his assignment was over, Uriah joined his father in May of 1776 and moved up to Saratoga County. Specifically, he moved to Malta, which at the time was called Dunning Street, named for Uriah's uncle, Michael Dunning, who was the early settler of the area. Uriah and his father and other members of the family joined the local 13th Albany militia and spent the rest of the year in the woods chasing Tories at places like Fort Edward. At one point, Uriah even mentions bringing a Tory back at the edge of his bayonet. In July of 1777, Uriah bought his first land in Ballston, just as General Burgoyne's invasion was coming down from Canada. The frontier was in turmoil, and a lot of the Ballston residents, including Uriah, left the area to get out of harm's way. He went back to Connecticut, but as soon as he got there, he signed on for 2 months with Colonel Latimer's militia regiment, which was being sent back north to reinforce General Gates' army that was trying to block Burgoyne. So Uriah retraced the 175-mile journey back to the area, arriving just in time for the first day's battle at Saratoga on September 19th, 1777. Uriah says he was in the thickest of the battle. The bullets were flying all around, and the troops were being cut to pieces. The following year, Uriah moved back to Ballston, built a cabin on the land that he bought, got married. He then joined the local 12th Albany militia, which served the Ballston area. And during the famous raid in Ballston in October 1780, Uriah was away in Connecticut, had taken his wife and an infant daughter, and had left a 2-year-old daughter with his brother and sister here at Ballston. He was very distraught when learning of the raid and was concerned that his daughter and the other relatives had been taken or harmed by the British. When they realized that the family was safe, there was a tremendous amount of relief. They learned that the family had hidden away for 3 days in the woods, sleeping under their cart as they left the area, and were safe over in Dunning Street. Uriah continued to live in the area and served during the rest of the war, and eventually bought the land in 1792 on which this house is situated. Him and his wife, Tamer, raised 8 children here, and he continued to serve in the local Ballston community throughout much of his long life, even becoming lieutenant colonel of the local militia in the early 1800s and serving as a town justice for many years in the first 2 decades of the new century. Uriah's experience certainly was not unique and probably representative of many thousands of young men on the frontier who were taking care of their families, working their farms, while still performing their military service in support of the new nation.
When I left off on the story of Joe Bettis, he had been captured for the second time. This time he was not let go. He was brought to Albany, he was put on trial, he was convicted of the crime of treason and sentenced to die. On April 1st, 1782, April Fool's Day, Joe Bettis stood on a plank with a noose around his neck. And there are two stories as to what may have happened at that point. One story is that he jumped off the plank so that he would hang himself rather than be hanged. The other story is that his father pulled the rope that hanged him. I am standing here at the gravesite of the Bettis family in Hillside Cemetery on Kingsley Road in Burnt Hills. Joe, however, is not buried here. Only the rest of his family is. Joe was probably buried in a pauper's grave, someplace in Albany. We'll never know where. There were no markers done for people who were as bad as he was.
And Angus McDermott, living in his home on Hop City Road, realizes one evening that through this thunderstorm that's approaching, and thunder and rain and wind, that one of his cows may be out. And so he decides to go out that evening under the darkness and look for this cow. And as he's walking down through the trail looking for the cow, he comes across, or what he thinks he sees, is an apparition of something that has cloven hoofs, a smell of sulfur, making some strange noises, what he assumes is the devil himself. Turns around post haste, comes back, discusses with his wife that he thinks he saw the devil on this laneway that he was trying to find the cow, and then decides that he may need to go to church for the rest of his life. And he does attend church. He's a parishioner of the local church for years afterwards because of this sighting that he felt was the devil. And that name of that road happens to be today Devil's Lane.
So in July of 1783, George Washington was in the area looking at the mineral springs that were known for in the area. He was there with Alexander Hamilton and George Clinton. While he was there, he really wanted to visit James Gordon, General Gordon, who was the unofficial revolutionary leader for the town of Ballston. But he had one problem. He didn't know where he lived. Well, in those days, if you didn't know where somebody lived, you'd ask around. So that's what he did. He went down Middle Line Road and found a cabin. He went up to the cabin and he knocked on the door. And the cabin was owned by a Thomas Connor. Thomas Connor was eating dinner at the time and he had no idea who was at his front door. All he knew was they were interrupting his dinner. So he went to the front door, answered, and George Washington asked him where he could find General Gordon's house. Well, Tom Connor, who was not a happy man, said to him, I'll tell you, turn around, take the first right, the path down the first right, go through the woods, and stick to it. Any darn fool can find it. And he slammed the door in Washington's face. Well, Connor had no idea who he was talking to. And a few days later, he found out that it was General George Washington, and he was so upset that he had said those things and done those things to Washington. But that's history. Fortunately, Washington was able to move on and find Gordon's house. They had a great dinner. He thanked Gordon for all he had done during the war, and then Gordon took him to Forts Ferry to get him on his way. Gordon also had a political career in that he served in the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate and served 2 terms as a U.S. representative. But more significantly to us here is he was the first supervisor in the town of Ballston.
In the 1770s and into the early 1780s, many people across the 13 colonies played a role in our American Revolution. Many people became heroes. Many people did things they probably didn't expect they were able to do. But it's those individual heroes in all those little towns and cities all across America, or what was America at that time. It is all those people who knew the land and who knew they could get weapons and who knew they had a cause to fight for. They all came together to do what they felt they had to do to gain us our independence. Of course, there were some who were not on the Patriot side, who were on the side of the British king. That created problems within the nation, the new nation as well. But over time, those problems seem to have been resolved. But without those heroes, and you see a whole lot of those heroes in the town of Ballston, we would never have gained what we did. Yes, there were villains. There were people who did bad things. There always will be. But they're outshined by the deeds that were done by so many people. And today, we are indebted to those people who helped us create this incredible experiment that we have, the United States of America.